everybody. Lance Russell and Dave Brown right along ringside. By golly, we're about ready to go with more big action.
Thank you very much, and welcome to Georgia Championship Wrestling. I'm Gordon Soler, your host, and we have quite an hour in store for us.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Championship Wrestling at ringside. This is Vince McMahon, along with wrestling's only living legend, Bruno Sammartino.
Welcome to this week's edition of Mid-South Wrestling Television. I'm your host, Boyd Pierce, another outstanding card.
Hey, guys, and welcome back to the Regional Rasslin Podcast, where we talk the territories. I am Ray Russell, and this week we begin yet another new project here on Regional Rasslin. We are going to go back in time and focus on the AWA on ESPN. So we're going to kick off the era of the AWA joining the ESPN network. And it all begins August 27th of 1985. And we'll talk all about that in the weeks to come here on the project. But in order to get things going, as you guys know, I love to set the stage is what we're going to do here this week. And kind of talk about some of the things going on around the world of the AWA over the last couple of years that kind of, well, that brought us to here, I guess you could say. And we're going to go back and discuss that with the one and only, a familiar voice here to the Regional Rasslin world. He was here for the UWF 1986 project, and he's back for AWA on ESPN, even attended perhaps some of these shows. We'll talk about that when we get there. But right now, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome onto the program. Welcome back to Regional Rasslin, the one and only Mr. Roman Gomez. Welcome back, Roman.
From the entertainment capital of the world, it's Roman Gomez, baby.
The fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada. There it is. I love it. What a welcome back for Roman here. It's great to have you back for a new project. Good to see you back here, Roman.
Oh, it's awesome to be back. I feel like, was it Peaches and Herb reunited, and It Feels So Good should be playing in the background. It's good to be working with you again, right?
Mm-hmm. I can't agree. We can't miss you if you don't go away. I never go away, so they never miss me, Roman, but they have missed you. And so I've missed you. And so it's always good, you put a smile on my face every time we talk, and that's a positive right there. And then we're going to be talking wrestling, so it's a double positive. And I'm looking forward to jumping into this whole ESPN AWA deal.
Oh, no doubt, no doubt. For those of you that might not be familiar with the AWA, or somebody out there might need a refresher course, we can give them a little background.
Absolutely. And we're not going to go back super far like I've done with my St. Louis history, or like we've been doing with the Georgia stuff lately. We've been going back and doing a deep dive, but we are going to go back a couple years here just to kind of set the stage, give everybody a narrative, an idea of what was going on leading into this whole ESPN deal in the summer of 1985. And so though the AWA is still moving along here in 85, the once thriving Juggernaut promotion had themselves a golden goose not that long ago, just a couple years ago. Most say it was Verne Gagne's refusal to move on with the times that would ultimately cause said golden goose, thy name is Hulk Hogan, by the way, to leave the promotion and take many of his friends along with him over the course of the next several weeks and months. That narrative of Verne being behind the times would come back time and time again. We'd hear that quite a bit throughout the 1980s and would become the focal blame of the AWA's ultimate demise in the early 1990s. It was so much so that even here in 1985, Dave Meltzer, the Wrestling Observer, heavily criticizing Verne even back in 85 for his resistance to adapt, evolve, and change. Roman, as a fan, what did you think of the AWA when you first had ability to watch it?
Well, I was excited because that was my first exposure to going to live wrestling matches. So it kind of has a soft spot in my heart for that, going to the Showboat all those times. It was something that was new to me. I wasn't able to go see the NWA live or WWF. So I like the AWA, obviously.
Well, yeah, obviously there is some bias there, I would imagine, because you got to go, and it was not only something you could watch on TV, like, I grew up watching Crockett or I grew up watching whatever, but Sportatorium Wrestling, for instance, World Class and USWA, I couldn't go to the Sportatorium in Dallas up here in Cleveland, but I could watch it on ESPN. It's a different story when you could actually go to the actual live events like you were able to do. And so I can see why there's a soft spot in your heart no matter what was happening in the ring. And that's not a knock on the talent that's here in 1985 by any means. We're going to be covering some serious talent here, guys. But at the same time, you got to go back, and for as much talent as Verne had access to here, talking Stan Hansen's and Rick Martel's and the Road Warriors and the Long Riders and Sergeant Slaughter and Larry Zbyszko and a young Kurt Hennig and very shortly here, Scott Hall. You can still argue, though, the point to be true in many instances that I'm sure we will come across here as this project progresses. Verne Gagne, booking-wise and maybe mentality-wise, was behind the times.
Oh, yeah. He had a lot of talent, and, I've oftentimes looked back like, my gosh, how did this thing go south? They had so much talent, but like you've discussed and we'll discuss further, Verne was behind the sign of times.
A lot of people, the narrative was put out there years ago, and the casual fan that kind of follows wrestling history are led to believe that once Hogan left and he took Mean Gene and Bobby Heenan and Jesse Ventura and Dr. D and all these guys started trickling out of the AWA over to Vince McMahon land, a lot of people believe that that was the end of the AWA. That simply isn't so. I just mentioned quite a few talents. I left out Jimmy Garvin, the Freebirds, so many great talents coming through Verne Gagne's territory here in 1985, and we're going to be covering a lot of those guys extensively as we move along. But before we begin 85, let's set the stage and start by going back in time just a couple years. Let's go back to November 14th, 1983, Phoenix, Arizona. A guy by the name of Hulk Hogan's final date in the company. Now, Hulk had been on top here, working on top as a huge baby face. The fans really rallying. Hulkamania was born in the AWA. I don't think people realize that.
He got over, originally he was managed by Johnny Valiant and whatnot, but the fans saw it. They saw something special in him. They had to turn him babyface, and that's something that's incredible when you're trying to push a guy as a heel, but he ends up being a face.
Yeah, I can't think of an instance where Verne Gagne was forced to change somebody so quickly, too. It wasn't very long before the Hulkster goes from heel to face because of that fan reaction. Now, Vince would do that later with Jake and Randy Savage and even Honky Tonk Man. It took a few months, but didn't take long to turn him heel. Well, the fans let Vince know what they thought about Honky Tonk, but here it was Hogan with Johnny Valiant, of all people, as his manager. Kind of ironic that Brutus Beefcake, Brother Brutai, would also be managed by Johnny V in the WWF. But Hogan's final date here, November 14th. On that card, he works double duty, not only defeating Jerry Blackwell, but winning a Battle Royal as well. So Hulkamania was indeed running wild even before the WWF, brother. In fact, I'd imagine it was the overness of this entire Hulkamania thing in the AWA, the Midwest, that kind of sold Vince McMahon on hiring Hogan away to be his lead babyface in that world champion role for the national expansion.
Yeah, and, wrestling can kind of run its course, and the AWA fans were probably looking for somebody different than Gagne and Bockwinkel to be on top all the time, So it was a fresher face. It was a younger guy. It wasn't a veteran, so to speak. And so I think the fans were kind of clamoring for a changing of the guard a little bit.
It's kind of funny. You tell stories of some of the wrestlers in the know of this era, the early 80s, and they felt like a lot of the old guard promoters thought that this whole sports entertainment, this showmanship deal was going to be a fad, that the fans would want to come back to technical wrestling. And we always loved technical wrestling. I remember sitting down 10, 11 years old and watching Mr. Perfect and Bret Hart at SummerSlam 91. I didn't know that was called a technical match. I just know I really enjoyed their work. So I think, Savage and Steamboat, you can go back. I'm just naming WWF matches, but you can go back and always find really good matches. That doesn't mean you can't entertain the fans while having a really good wrestling match.
The name on the marquee is wrestling. So I was the same way. I could enjoy a great wrestling match and, I looked at it through a different eyes as a young kid or a fan. We weren't, that's a 5-star match or that's 3 3/4. We just knew it was good, but you also do like to be entertained. But you and I grew up in an era where it was more wrestling per se, or at least that's what I like to focus on, was wrestling more so than the, outrageous entertainment that, sometimes can happen in wrestling.
Well, I think the personalities have to draw you in, whether they're as colorful as Hulk Hogan or as, I don't want to say average. I can't think of the word I'm looking at, but like Bret Hart, he's more of a realistic character versus a Hulk Hogan style character. But the character, no matter how huge they are, colorful, or just whatever the case may be, whatever you like them for, they still have to draw you in. And Verne was retired by this point. He wasn't there anymore, and he was getting up there in age, and so rightfully so, he's out of the picture as far as active competition here. I think he worked a couple matches here around 83, 84 and some tags, but he was pretty much done by this point. So Hulk Hogan works his last AWA date, November 14th. He goes off to New Japan on November 18th through December 10th here in 83, working for Antonio Inoki's New Japan promotion for the MSG Tag League. And upon returning to the States, Hulk would not return to the AWA, but rather lay low, brother, and get things mapped out with Vince McMahon on his vision for Hulkamania to New York City, dude. So Hogan would return to the WWF as a babyface, a main event babyface at that, on the December 27th, 1983 set of TV tapings, and the rest, as they say, is history. Great history for Hulk Hogan. Verne Gagne, maybe not so much.
Yeah, and for all the things McMahon's been criticized for, and then, a lot of them rightfully so, he had a vision of going big time, and you needed that main event player, and he saw it in Hogan, and he was correct. He was a great scout of talent. He had him before in the late 70s, 1980 as well, but there was something he saw in Hogan, and he's like, I'm putting my hopes and pinning him on Hogan, and boy, was he correct.
You got that. So in later interviews, Hogan talked about the New Japan tour, this particular one where he leaves the AWA, claiming he left his merchandise for Verne Gagne and company to sell for him while he was away. Now, it's important to note that Hulk's merchandise during this time was not purchased by Verne Gagne. It was paid for by Hulk Hogan himself. So it was legally his property, meaning he should have made the proceeds. Now, I understand paying the Gagnes a cut for the distribution of the merchandise. They're doing it while he's away, out of town, so to speak. But according to Hogan, Verne Gagne refused to give Hulk any of the money when he was going to be coming back. He said, I'm not, I'm keeping this. I sold it for you, and I'm going to keep this for you because, you are my likeness. Now, that coupled with the fact that Verne had been reluctant to pull the trigger, the AWA title change that everybody was clamoring for at the time, Hogan taking it away from that nearly 50-year-old Nick Bockwinkel. Infamous matches during this time frame would take place, including at least one televised match. Roman, you're a tape trader from way back. You might know if there's more than one of these out there, but you know which one I'm referencing. We see Hulk Hogan essentially defeat Nick Bockwinkel for the AWA World title, and the crowd loses their ever-loving mind. But it winds up being a dusty finish. So it appeared Hogan had won the gold, but we wind up returning the belt to Bach.
And that was, they had several matches where Hogan got screwed. And it came to the point where the fans were just like, we want to see the payoff. We've invested our time, our money. We've supported him. We want to see the big payoff. And they had the football pulled out from underneath them, like poor Charlie Brown went through. And after about the billionth time, they were like, come on, enough's enough. And you can hear, for those of you that watch Super Sunday, you can hear the absolute anger. It's not like, oh, we thought he won. Right. They were livid that he did not win the belt. They felt screwed.
And, that's the kind of thing, they talk about Dusty overdoing that Dusty finish, and it kind of killed Crockett near the end of the last couple of years of the Crockett promotion, doing it to death. But you can only do, even if you do it one time, if you do it wrong, and like you said, they have been screwing the fans out of this, kind of teasing it. You knew, like a great movie, that at the end of the day, the hero was going to persevere, but that simply wasn't the case here. And I don't know that it was the last straw for Hogan, but it had to weigh heavily on Hulk's decision to head to New York, where there was a promoter ready to pull said trigger. I will make you champion, pal.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you've got somebody promising you the world and you've been, in your eyes, ripped off, you've been screwed over on the, like you've alluded to, the merchandise, the shirts, you've been screwed over on that, you've been screwed over on getting the push as the world champion, and Bockwinkel had been there forever. Hulk's got to be thinking well, gee, if they're not going to give it to me now, when would they give it to me?
Yeah.
And here comes Vince, hey, I'll make you a star. So you can't blame Hulk for jumping.
No, and absolutely not. And of course, everybody, there's two sides to every story, or at the very least, and the Gagnes have their own version. But many would argue that Verne simply couldn't see the forest for the trees. But by all accounts, he was fully aware that Hogan was the main draw. It was the Hulkster bringing in the houses at this point. However, Verne couldn't move away from his old school mentality that a world champion had to be a technically sound wrestler. They had to have a background filled with athletic credentials and not a showman type like the Hulkster was. Even though Hulk's charisma was packing the house, and Verne knew it, Gagne didn't view him as championship material, as crazy as that sounds. Those are two different things in Verne's eyes.
Oh, definitely. And, Verne gets criticized a lot for putting the belt on himself. But if that's your company, who are you going to trust more than yourself? Verne knew he wasn't going to bolt and go to another league, so he kept putting the belt on himself.
Until Father Time, he caught up with Verne, and he knew that, we got to create a new star here. I don't know who that was going to be. But you look back and you think about some of the guys who held the belts, short-term, long-term, whatever the case may be, up until that point. And Nick Bockwinkel, obviously tried and true, as the world champion there, one of my favorites of all time. But also Billy Robinson, even Dick Beyer, Dr. X, comes through for that little bit. So there's always somebody very credible on top as the world champion, as far as their amateur background goes, as far as their ability to handle it in the ring if it needs to be done that way. So that's not to say money doesn't talk, though, Roman. Money always talks, as we learned from the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase, a few years later, that everyone has a price, including Verne Gagne. So as Hulk Hogan lobbied for a run with the belt there in 1983, Verne leaned into agreeing to giving Hulk the belt. I'll give you the belt, Hulk, but on 2 conditions. I want a large cut of your merchandise. And Verne wanted a piece of Hogan's New Japan tour money, I guess simply because he was the world champion. Now, in the NWA, 3% of the booking fees would go back to the NWA president, the NWA governing body, if you will, whatever you want to call it, whenever they would book them out to any territory, including All Japan. But here, Verne was wanting apparently a hell of a chunk of Hogan's New Japan tour money, which Hogan had made all on his own. Now, I get you're going to be my champion, and it's just old school mentality from Verne here in the 1980s.
If you're Hogan, you're thinking like, wait a minute, I'm going to a foreign country. I'm putting my body on the line.
Right.
I'm getting the bumps and bruises. Why am I going to pay somebody else?
Exactly. And let's not forget, Hogan had already been, it's not like Verne got Hogan the deal for New Japan. Hogan had already been working New Japan steadily. He had gotten over there.
Right.
So it was, but Verne obviously making some demands here. Now, of course, the Gagnes thought their offer was fair, claiming they couldn't trust Hogan due to his unreliability. So the deal they were offering would compensate should he screw them over. So when Hulk Hogan jumped to the WWF, they used that as evidence that they knew Hulk Hogan was always a possibility to go AWOL. A little hindsight storytelling there from the Gagne family.
And the interesting thing is that both Verne and Hulk have passed. So, and then plus wrestlers are known for not exactly telling the truth. Lately, documentaries on Hogan and all his lies and, things he said. So the truth might lie a little bit in between each. They each might be telling a little bit of truth, but we'll never 100% know who was in the right. Or
I guess I should have prefaced this with a little, take anything here. I don't want to say with a grain of salt. I feel like there's truths to this. Some of these things both parties agree on. Verne, of course, looking at it from a promoter's point of view, and Hulk looking at it from Hulk Hogan's point of view. And like you said, there's been many various stories shared as well. But so Hogan stated he actually offered Verne 50-50 of the merchandise, which I thought that was it's probably more than he got from Vince. And some other fair dealings, brother, whatever that might have meant. But Verne just demanded more. He wanted more. He wanted the New Japan money. Verne wanted more from Hulk than Hulk was willing to give him, and said that Gagne was out of touch with how the business had changed over time. You can't own which is kind of funny considering that Vince would go on to own these people for many years to come. But anywho, Hogan returns to the States after his Japan tour, quits the AWA via telegram, Western Union, brother, to work for a promotion who planned to build their entire future around him as a performer. Verne simply believed the opposite of everything Vince was doing at the time. Verne wanted more technical wrestlers, not showmanship and spectacle owning the show. He was using territory logic. Vince was looking at the national expansion idea. Verne protected the meaning of the world title. He couldn't give Hogan the world title because he wasn't a wrestler per se, versus Vince was simply ready to push the star that makes the most money. Verne wanted to control the talent so they don't become too big, if you will. Meanwhile, Vince says, let the star explode. Now, that would explode in Vince's face later on with Hogan and Austin until he gets to the point in the 2000s where he goes, I can't let a single wrestler be bigger than my company. But way back here, that's what Verne's saying.
You are so onto something, because I was thinking along those lines, too, that had they pushed Hogan as the champion and everything, Verne might have been in the back of his mind, I can't control this guy anymore. Yeah. He's more popular than I thought. He's going to want more money now that he's a champion. He's going to want this. He's going to want that. So it's kind of hard to control somebody if they're, selling out arenas like that and asking for demands. And maybe that's why Verne would try to keep him under his thumb a little bit longer.
Well, that's an excellent point. But with a legal and binding contract, have you put something together? If Hulk Hogan's there to make you the money that he made Vince, I'm all for it, man. I don't have that kind of ego where I need to control you. If you're making me that kind of money, we can do business together. You know what I mean? And Verne seemed to want to, he'd more so wanted to have, I think he felt like, again, this was a fad. Hulkamania was going to be a fad. It would die out. And first, Hulkamania lived forever, brother, much to the chagrin of Verne Gagne. So while Verne was booking like it was 1975 in 1983, Vince was already booking like it was 1985 in 1983. So Vince was ahead of the game. Verne was definitely behind the times. I think I don't know anybody's going to argue that.
No, definitely. And, I look back at my fandom as an AWA fan,
right?
Is that you would hit the nail right on the head about wrestling personalities that they draw money. Because you take somebody like a Billy Robinson or a Brad Rangans. Yeah, they were great in the ring. Nobody was excited to go see a Brad Rangans match. He was considered boring because his interviews were bland or whatever. He could outwork, a lot of the guys and could teach them all kinds of holds and everything, but he was not a guy that you could put on the marquee to draw fans in, and Hogan had that personality. There's no doubt about it. He had something special, and Vince capitalized on it.
Well, as I continue to do a little digging, a little research, there is one guy who's still with us here, and that's Greg Gagne, the son of Verne and a longtime wrestler for the AWA. So Greg has refuted the story about his father, Verne, taking Hogan's merchandise money while he was in Japan. But Greg also claims that while Hogan was on that very New Japan tour, you talked about stories you don't believe. I got to question this one. Greg, in recent years, has told the story that CBS came calling the Gagnes. They came calling the AWA office. Now, supposedly, CBS approached the Gagnes with a Saturday night's main event style of program. Well before the WWF aired on NBC, by the way. So the supposed CBS pitch would air an AWA event on network TV, CBS, in prime time on a quarterly type basis. But Greg claims that CBS demanded Hulk Hogan had to headline those programs, which were tentatively scheduled to start February of 1984. So Hulk Hogan, and Greg has just started throwing this number around more recently, was supposedly going to make $6 million per year through CBS had he stayed with the AWA. But since he never came back from New Japan, Greg said he never knew about the deal.
Yeah, I'm calling BS on that. I hate to be so blunt about it, but I've heard that story with the CBS, and because the average person did not really know. The wrestling fans knew, but AWA was not something that the average Joe would know who a Steve Olsonowski was or something like that. So for them to say, oh yeah, they're going to go prime time, when Vince did the Saturday Night's Main Event, of course, everybody knew Hulk Hogan. They knew Iron Sheik. They were on MTV. They were on this. They were on that, So I find a hard time believing that, HBO or CBS or anybody was lining up to do an AWA primetime special.
And let's not forget, Vince was already bedfellows to a degree with Dick Ebersol. They had already been hobnobbing, right, in the New York City area. So they knew each other. They talked about things. Like you said, MTV was a huge part in the whole rock and wrestling era, the national expansion. This story, it's really peculiar in 1983. When you think about it, going into 1984, why was anybody going to throw money? We hadn't hit national expansion yet. And CBS just gives up on the AWA, right? But $6 million, that's a peculiar amount of money because that's like $24 million today. And if Hulk was getting $24 million today, Verne was at least getting double that, you would think, right? So you're telling me CBS is throwing $75 million, maybe more, just at a perhaps possible would-be wrestling show on your TV? Nobody had done that. Not since the Dumont Network did somebody have even quarterly, like Greg was suggesting. So again, this story is the first time I heard it, I go, wow, it's like new to me. But every time I've heard the story since, I mean, you call bullshit on it, man, and you're not one to do that very often. I got a whole can of it. I'm over here painting bullshit all over this story because I just can't see it. But Greg claims that the deal was all but done. They were going to get the deal anyway, but there was a newspaper strike, the Chicago Tribune, who owned various TV stations, Tribune stations like WG in Chicago, WPIX in New York, KTLA in Los Angeles, Philly. They had all these big markets, all these big cities. Only one problem, Roman. See, these guys, when they tell these stories, they just tell them off the top of their head a lot of times. They don't go fact check make-believe stories before they tell them. And wrestlers got away with that for decades. But now we have something called the internet. So when Greg Gagne says something like this, Ray Russell can just go Google Chicago Tribune strike and realize the problem with this story is the newspaper strike that Greg alludes to. It was the strike of 1983. It did affect Tribune, which did own the WGN company, but it did not happen at this exact moment in time. Go figure.
Well, and with wrestling, I mean, let's face it, the whole industry is based on fabrications, make-believe, lies, especially in the kayfabe era. So when wrestlers tell a story of something from 40 years ago, you have to ask yourself, are they BSing us, or are they just not remembering it right, or is it a combination?
I think it's a combination.
Lots of gray area.
I think they BS themselves. They tell the story for so long, they believe that's
right.
the way it happens sometimes. And I don't think they even realize they're lying, or whatever you want to call it, fabricating stories and things of that nature. But a local newspaper strike, killing a national CBS deal is a bit of a stretch, right? So network TV decisions were not dependent on a city's print promotion, right? So if the newspaper's down, we can't promote it in the newspaper. We're going to lose our ass, so we're not going to show this at all. It's very far-fetched.
Well, yeah, and especially back in that time when it came to wrestling, for the most part, there was two camps. There was the hardcore wrestling fans, and then there are people like, oh, that's phony. I don't want to watch that. So the AWA, I don't even think the hardcore fans would have watched it, but I don't think it would have had a good enough buy rate or anything. Whereas now if they ran something, people might be, I'm bored, let's put it on WWF. Or back then people loved wrestling or they thought it was stupid. There was really no middle ground.
No, absolutely not. I could tell you growing up, you had to be very careful who you mentioned you watched wrestling to at school or otherwise, because there were kids that watched it and they didn't admit that they watched it, most of them. Or then there was clearly the ones that didn't, and they picked on you for watching wrestling. So it was not cool in the 1980s even. But you think back, and it got played on the Dumont Network because they were playing it to death. It was something new, and everybody was enjoying it. But then it got tiring, and away goes wrestling, away goes the Dumont Network, and then there were certain territories that thrived. You look at Memphis and their ratings, their shares, and what they did. So a lot of wrestling fans in Memphis, but other cities, other territories, they were dependent on just wrestling fans, like you said, and everybody else just kind of went about their day. Well, you could hear the snickers and sneers, and this drove me nuts as a kid because I loved wrestling. But whenever a news reporter or someone on TV would start to mention wrestling, they just had to add that snicker, that sneer, that snide comment about it every time. It was like, do we really need to do that? Do you do that when you talk about Indiana Jones? Do you do that? Star Wars? Can you believe these guys are up in space? They don't do that, but they do that for wrestling. That drove me nuts.
Yeah, they were always very condescending, very snarky. And like you said, like they wouldn't do a news report on Harry Blackstone or a magician and go, he's not really doing that magic trick,
Right.
But in wrestling, like, oh, well, that's not fake. But that's why people liked, George Michael, the sports machine.
Yeah.
When he covered the NWA or the Crockett Cup, he did it like as a professional journalist, and you can decide whether you thought it was real or not or whatever. But yeah, you'd see news reports on wrestling and it was always a backhanded, oh, he almost hit him there. Ha ha ha. Wrestling's fake. And they acted like they were pulling the cover back, exposing wrestling like we didn't know what was going on.
Well, we talked a lot here about Hulk Hogan and what Verne had in his hand before he kind of let it go, but we're going to fast forward here to early 1985 real quick. Still talking about the Hulkster as the Iron Sheik story begins to make the rounds. Now, the amount of money has been debated over time because I've heard various figures as high as $100,000, which I also call bullshit on, but the amount really isn't important here. What is important, as the story goes, Verne Gagne felt he owned Hulkamania. It happened in his town, and that Hogan betrayed him and his business. And thus Gagne allegedly offered to pay the Iron Sheik a hefty sum of money to break Hulk Hogan's leg and maim the now WWF World Champion. Now, Verne had broke Sheik into the business many, many years prior. An amazing amateur trainer for the U.S. Olympic team was Sheiky Baby. Verne Gagne trained Sheik for the professional wrestling game and had him work his way all the way up from lowly referee to becoming a professional wrestler himself. So you could argue that maybe Khosrow Vaziri, the Iron Sheik, felt like he might have owed a debt of gratitude to Verne, maybe in some way, shape, or form. But rather than take Gagne's money, Sheik stated that he went back and reported the offer to both Hulk Hogan and Vince McMahon, solidifying Sheik's loyalty to the WWF. Needless to say, Hulk's leg stayed in place.
I got to wonder about that. You know, the $100,000 number is one I've always heard reported.
Right.
I'm
throwing the number out of the window, though.
Yeah. But hypothetically, if it was 100,000, wrestlers are notorious, and, you know, rightfully so in many regards, for complaining. The promoter didn't pay me what he said. He said he'd pay me this much. And, you know, we got skipped on this. At that time, you know, the money wasn't what they're making now. If somebody put $100,000 in your lap and said, break his leg, or they could easily play it off like it just accidentally happened in a match, I think a lot of the wrestlers would have actually done that for a guaranteed $100,000 right there on the spot.
That would have bought Sheiky Baby a lot of medicine, Bubba, if you know what I mean.
Yes, yes, it would have.
Well, since that time, it's been brought up to Hogan in various interviews. He's downplayed the story, saying that I heard the rumors, but would never actually dig into it and talk. Very wisely, Hogan keeping that, you know, whatever really transpired there under the covers. He made it sound credible, though. But how serious the entire thing really was may never really be known. Naturally, Greg Gagne, again, refuting this story about his father. I believe this one a little more than I believe the CBS story, though. I'll say that much.
Yeah, I can possibly, I'll go with you on that. The CBS story, not buying it all. This one might have a little bit of legs to it.
All right, now we're going to kind of look a little overview here. I want to look at some of the guys that Verne lost shortly after Hogan, and I'm sure he played somewhat of a part in it. Guys we're seeing, not just his friends, but maybe some of the other guys are like, hey, they're doing pretty well over here in this WWF world. Yeah, I'm going to go give that a try too. So Verne loses Hogan, and very shortly after, Mean Gene Okerlund, Dr. D, David Schultz. By the summer of '84 goes Bobby Heenan, Jesse Ventura, Adrian Adonis, eventually Ken Patera, Jim Brunzell, even going to leave the High Flyers there, leave the Gagnes for the WWF to become a Killer Bee. So we look at some of the big names. Those are some, make no mistake about it, Johnny V, just naming some names here that left Verne for the WWF. But at the same time, we're going to look at some of the names, just kind of a quick overview and get your take on maybe memories or thoughts. You've watched a lot of tapes and things, Roman, but Jumbo Sharuda, who was an Olympian. We've covered him a lot on our Pro Wrestling Academy with Dan Ginnity. You know Dan very well, Roman. We've been watching most of Jumbo's career throughout the 1970s that exists on film, and just an amazing talent. I'm not saying he wasn't worthy of an AWA world title run, but again, that's Verne going back to an amateur who was an amazing pro, but Jumbo's not translating to Hogan money here in the States.
I didn't know much about Jumbo back then. I was just like, oh, it's a Japanese wrestler's got the belt, but through the tape trading and everything, Jumbo, tremendous talent. And, you can understand why it wasn't a long run, because obviously you couldn't cut promos here in the States and whatnot back in the day when you talked him into the building. But, I'm sure it was a nice little business transaction of, he can have the belt for a little while as long as he loses it back quickly.
So I'm going to name drop a list here. I don't know, maybe a dozen guys or so that came through after Hogan, that's been here mostly through 84 into early 85, summer of 85 here. And just listen to some of the talent that come through after Hulk Hogan. You have an idea that Verne was still fairly stable as he brought in Tony Atlas, Bruiser King Kong Brody, Mad Dog Vachon was in and out, of course. King Kong Bundy, who worked here as Boom Boom Bundy. I remember the first time I traded a tape and said, what the hell is that? But that's good. I love the domino effect of name changes here at the AWA, because we had Dick the Bruiser and Brody lost that match. He had to become King Kong Brody. But because we had King Kong Brody, King Kong Bundy had to be Boom Boom Bundy. What a name. That's something for everybody. That feels like the old Boom Boom Room, right?
Yeah, that was just such a horrible name that they gave Bundy.
Well, we see the Fabulous Ones experiment. They leave the Memphis territory, come into the big time here, the AWA, and come through 1984 into early 85 before returning to Memphis. Stan Lane and Steve Kern, very cool. Mr. Saito is here until he goes off to prison in April of 85. Masked Superstar comes through, Bill Eadie. He's here in early part of 1985. We're going to see shots from Blackjack Lanza, Dick the Bruiser, Crusher, Bobby Duncombe. So now we're getting into some names, and it's like, Verne, again, this is not 1975.
I was so thrilled when the Masked Superstar came into the AWA because I was there for his debut.
Awesome.
Had no idea about the Observer, didn't know what that was. I just showed up as a fan at a Pro Wrestling USA taping, and he did a run-in and attacked Brunzell, and I might have been the only person in the building that marked out. I was like, yeah, because I was always a Masked Superstar fan, and I didn't care that he was a heel. I just thought he was a badass, and when he did that run-in, I was so happy I was there for that.
Great talker, great worker. They say there are cool heels. I don't think you can put him under the category of cool heel, but he's still cool as a heel. I love Bill Eadie. He's great at everything he ever did, really. Even just recently this week, had to watch him on No Holds Barred performing as Jake Bullet against Hulk Hogan. Rip him, brother. So, but I look at, so for every Fabs and Masked Superstar, we're still kicking around Blackjack Lanza and Crusher and Bruiser. And I know they have name value, especially Crusher, Bruiser, the Blackjacks had a hell of a run here, but I don't know that the fan base is the same. The same population of fan base is the same here in the early 80s as it was, say, even, 7-8 years prior. But we're going to see these guys travel through. Another guy that pops up here, former WWF champion, Bob Backlund, going to get shots here in 85. Unfortunately, Bob finishes up with Verne right before ESPN. So he just barely almost made it there. Butch Reed, I didn't even know Butch came through the AWA. He's here through the spring and early summer of 85. Billy Robinson, of course, he's going to leave us by August, unfortunately. Steve-O, random appearances. Jimmy Ward's jumping up and down somewhere right now. Steve-O here in 1985 AWA. And Ray Stevens was some random off and on. Now, we're going to get to the talent that's here full time, but I just wanted to name some of the talent that was here shortly before we're going to take over the ESPN world.
Butch Reed, you had mentioned it. Yeah. He came in as Jimmy Garvin's bodyguard for about a week, and then he was gone. He disappeared real quick. And another two names that, it's kind of surprising just knowing Verne's history, you had not mentioned was the Road Warriors.
Yeah.
The Road Warriors were hot as a firecracker, and I was there that night. They won the tag belts against the Baron and Crusher, and that was a huge deal because titles didn't change hands like they do today every 5 minutes. That was a big deal to see the world titles change hands.
Absolutely, and I think so that's kind of like Verne learning his lesson, though, is it not? Do you think that Hogan doing what he did, do you think that played anything into the part of the Road Warriors are clearly not fundamentally sound workers, right? Especially in 1984. But he gives them they're not even a year together, maybe something like that at that point. And Verne is putting the belts on them because, well, what are you going to do? They're the Road Warriors, right?
Yeah, and I think he saw money. Like you said, maybe he did learn from the Hogan thing. The Road Warriors were over, and, they talk about the Road Warrior pop. I lived it. I saw it. When they came out to Iron Man, people lost their mind. And it also might have had something to do, like you said, with Hogan and the Bockwinkel. People thought Hogan should have been champ. And when Baron and Crusher were the champs, I remember even as a kid thinking like, my gosh, these guys are ancient. How are they going to compete against the Road Warriors? Like, it's just not believable for them to beat the Road Warriors.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. It wasn't believable. Looking at it on paper, it's believable. Like, how do we work this match and make it believable at the end of the day? And so I think the right team went over there. But I love the fact that Verne realizes you're going to have to adapt with the times, whether you want to or not. You got another. Now, they're not as hot as Hulk Hogan, but for territory purposes, they are a hot commodity, are the Road Warriors. So Verne capitalizing, giving them the belts. They win them back in August of 84, still champions here a year later, August 85, as we kick off the ESPN run. But also here right now at this point in time, Nick Bockwinkel still lurking around. Rick Martel, of course, is the AWA World Heavyweight Champion. We'll talk about Rick in a moment. Sergeant Slaughter comes back this year. Larry Zbyszko is here. Of course, Greg Gagne. He's not too far behind Daddy Verne. Baron von Raschke's still on the cards, as well as both Hennigs, Larry Hennig here off and on, and young Kurt still cutting his teeth. He had a few years in the business now, and he's getting there.
Yeah, he's coming along. He wasn't anywhere near superstar status, but he was definitely showing some improvement. And Ray, if I can talk about something you had mentioned earlier on in the podcast, or something I wanted to mention.
Sure.
Hogan leaving the AWA definitely hurt, but I think not enough credit goes to Mean Gene and Heenan leaving the AWA. Mean Gene was the conduit for the fans of the AWA, and him leaving, I think, hurt. And also Heenan. Heenan was Hogan's biggest nemesis, and the wrestlers that Heenan managed, taking that to a different territory, I think kind of hurt, because Heenan was so hated. Some of the biggest pops, believe it or not, was when Heenan actually got in the ring that I saw as a kid, where if he was managing Ken Patera and whoever it was, if the face beats Ken Patera, they get 5 minutes with Bobby Heenan. The crowd lost their mind to see Heenan in the ring for 5 minutes. Like, he got more of a reaction than Patera would, in that scenario. And I just thought that was very important. Those two leaving the AWA, I think, hurt a lot more than people give credit for.
I'll give credit too to the WWE Vault on YouTube just this week, and I believe the footage was already out there anyway, but just amazing quality. A 6-man tag involving Hogan and Heenan on opposite ends, and a handicap match with Hogan and Heenan and Patera, and there might have been even a third guy there, I can't remember, but obviously AWA matches. And yeah, you're absolutely right. The crowd comes unglued when we get that ultimate showdown we're waiting for the entire match. Hulk and Heenan in the ring at the same time, and of course Bobby gonna do the job and make the Hulkster look like the world beater. And you're 100% right, Bobby Heenan. I said it before, I'll say it again. If I ever had to sit down and do a fantasy wrestling draft, and it was one where you had to heavily actually write the characters out, the first round people would be picking Flair and Hogan, and I would be picking Bobby Heenan because he can work with anybody, right? It doesn't matter who he's managing because you got Bobby Heenan in the corner. And so I think that's an excellent point here. With Bobby gone, who replaces him? Adnan?
Exactly. And I think Heenan was such an underrated component of the Hogan-Andre feud when Andre turned heel. Because let's face it, Andre was not known for cutting great promos. No. Heenan, the fact he joined with the lowly Bobby Heenan got even more heat on Andre, and then Heenan could talk for him. Heenan was huge in that feud.
Relive the glory days of Memphis wrestling with the Retro Wrestling Review USWA podcast. Each week, we go back in time to review USWA Championship Wrestling from the 1990s, episode by episode. Join us for watch-alongs, behind-the-scenes stories, and exclusive interviews with people who were there and lived it. Whether you grew up watching it or you're discovering it for the first time, this podcast is your ringside seat to Memphis wrestling history. It's all a part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Listen now at USWApodcast.com.
Hey guys, Ray Russell back to talk to you about all the new and exciting audio and video podcasts we've been putting together over at patreon.com/WrestleCopia. As a self-funded brand, this entire ship is powered by our patrons. It's your support that keeps all of these wonderful shows going here at WrestleCopia. And with that said, I wanted to mention that we now have 3 major tiers with tons of Patreon-exclusive next-level content for our Patreon supporters. And it all starts with the $5 all-access tier, which gets you early access to many of the weekly podcasts, at least a dozen monthly digital downloads for your viewing and reading pleasure, the insanely detailed show notes for the Wrestling Memory Grenade Regional Rasslin, and the OG Monday Warfare podcast, plus random bonus video drops, archived old-school audio watch-alongs from the early years of the brand. It is a whole lot of fun wrapped under the all-access tier for only $5, but things get even hotter with the VIP Superfan tier. For just a few dollars more, you get everything already mentioned in the all-access tier, plus as part of the VIP tier, a whole new slew of videocast series where it's not just your typical watch-alongs. Sure, we laugh, we have fun, but we're also breaking down the history, the context, and the why behind what you're seeing. And as part of the VIP tier, you have access to Dan Gennety's Puroresu Academy videocast, the Coliseum videocast, and the Monday Warfare videocast, Raw versus Nitro, breaking down the history of the Monday Night War. Plus, you also get the Memphis 1985 folder of goodies and all show notes for the Puro Academy podcast and Gene's Retro Review Show. Lots to be had there at the VIP tier. But wait, there's more. For those WrestleCopia backers who crave even more from the brand, we bring you yet another level of content fit for a warrior, because it is indeed the ultimate tier, which gives you everything from the All Access Pass, everything from the VIP tier, plus you will receive access to the big ones video series featuring a lengthy look and discussion into some of the biggest pay-per-views, super shows, and other events from throughout wrestling history. It's also a great place to keep up with the big events that coincide with the Monday Warfare videocast and so many other big events from years gone by. You'll also have access to the newest big hit to the Copia brand. I'm talking about Regional Rasslin Unreal, the video series. Get ready for the next level in Regional Rasslin as we dissect territory history in video form. Watch along with us. But still, even more for your money, guys. You'll also receive access to the Treasure Chest, which offers patrons the unique opportunity to download and watch select rarities from wrestling history. And for those of you who are wondering what we offer, are contemplating joining a paid Patreon membership, or simply a curious lurker, a reminder there's a free tier at our Patreon that you can join as well. Remember, guys, no subscription, cancel any time, but I think you'll like the content that we're offering there for any budget you may have. And you can sign up right now, patreon.com/WrestleCopia, or look for the QR code where available. We appreciate your support in helping us pay the bills to keep the WrestleCopia Podcast Network running and enabling us to continue to bring you all the quality programming that we offer.
Hey, it's Bob Smith, and guess what? The Outdated Wrestling Hour is now part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. But hey, no fear, you're still going to hear the unique guests, comedy, music, authors, journalists, funny people. Who knows who's going to end up on the Outdated Wrestling Hour? Remember, it's all new and all old. So check it out in the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and wherever you get your podcasts. Listen if you know what's good for you.
We talked about who they lost. We talked about Hogan gone, Heenan gone. We talked about some of the talent that are still here. I want to hit on a few more names that have returned recently, and that includes the fabulous Freebirds. Michael Hayes, Buddy Roberts, Terry Gordy, all three of them here in full effect. 1985, it didn't work out in the WWF last fall, and unfortunately, there's some stories out there. But the Freebirds are here in the AWA. They've been here since April at this point, so they've been here a few months, kind of getting their feet wet in the AWA world. And, of course, led by Michael Hayes out there cutting the promos, Terry Gordy, an amazing worker, Buddy Roberts, the bump machine, perfect tandem. And some territories wouldn't take all three, but Verne takes all three, and he didn't really have much of an option, probably at this point. They were riding high off of all those, main events in Dallas and everything they had done. But it was good to see the boys here, the Freebirds, the Road Warriors. You got some serious team. The Long Riders, Bill Irwin and Scott Irwin have just shown up here right in this month. Perfect timing. Some of these guys are popping up at the right time.
Yeah, and the Freebirds were just excitement. And you fans know we talked a lot about the Freebirds, obviously, when we did our UWF podcast and all the excitement they caused. And when they came to the AWA, I was thrilled, and it was great to see them in person.
Yeah, the Freebirds, that's Road Warriors and Freebirds, arguably two of the top 5 tag teams maybe in history, certainly of this era, in any day of the week. So for Verne to have two of them, he's got something going here. He's got something cooking. And the Irwins ain't a bad, utility team, if you will. I hate to call them that, but we're gonna see on the first episode of the TV, they're gonna give the Road Warriors a run for their money. But also debuting here in July, a guy by the name of Boris Zukov, who sometimes works as Boris Zerkov. He's coming off of runs in Florida and Alabama doing the Russian shtick, and now he's here working with Sergeant Slaughter. You told me a little bit about you kind of maybe had a memory of Boris and the Sarge.
Yeah. Those that listen to the Mid-Atlantic podcast, Boris Zukov was, of course, one of Slaughter's privates when he went by the name of Jim Nelson. So They definitely go back a few years.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Boris Zukov coming here now working as the arch enemy of Sergeant Slaughter, of course, Russia versus America. We've not beaten that to death yet, apparently, here. So we got Boris Zukov here. It makes sense, though. You're going to TV. Sarge needs an opponent. Chris Markoff getting long in the tooth, so we're going to go with Boris Zukov. Also, Jerry Blackwell in and out throughout 85. Jimmy Garvin was here for quite a run. He leaves in May to go work Montreal for the summer, but he will be back. Oh, he is back by the beginning of the TV tapings here. So Jimmy Garvin was, as they're going to sell it on TV, suspended, but Jimmy Garvin is indeed back in the territory by the time we get to ESPN. Steve Regal going to be in and out throughout the summer, but he will be back as well. And that's very important, Garvin and Regal here.
Yeah, they shocked the world a couple months down the road from this first TV taping.
Boy, I'll say. It shocked me the first time I read about the results, in an old Aftermag or something like that. I didn't get to see the results happen, but man, talk about, I was like, is that real? How? I was trying to picture it in my head, how it transpired, but yeah, well, there will be future tag team champions. Upcoming here in August, we're going to see the AWA debut of a big fellow by the name of Scott Hall coming in.
Yeah, big Scott Hall, who wrestled some in Central States. And when I saw Hall at that time, I did not see stardom. I just saw a big guy, and it was good that they put him with Henning, so Henning could teach him a little bit. But I never thought Vader would go on to be the stars that they did. But
I get it.
You never know what's going to happen in wrestling.
No, big baby bull Leon White. Yeah, no kidding. Trucker hat coming out to the ring. Oh, man.
Yeah.
It brings back some memories. Stan Hansen also going to be, now that is a star right there. Big Stan Hansen coming in soon as well. Looking forward to that, man.
The bad man for Borgard, Texas comes to the AWA, and him and Martel had a good series of matches, and I was glad to see him there, but he had a history of him and Brody not always being the best for promoters, or causing a couple gray hairs with promoters, so it's not a surprise he wasn't there a super long time.
Well, again, that's a peculiar choice, although he was playing the heel role, and Verne didn't necessarily need a technical heel champion. I would imagine it was short-term, as most, outside of Bockwinkel, not very many of the AWA World Champion heels held the belt for super long, but I'm very curious what plans they might have had for Stan had it actually worked out the way, whatever they originally had envisioned there.
With the Hogan thing, I wonder if Verne was, if we can promote Stan Hansen as the AWA champ when he gets to Japan, maybe I can get some of the Japan money. I wonder if there was anything like that going on.
That was never going to happen with Stan Hansen. That might be why he ran over the belt and sent it back. My goodness.
Right. But I wonder if that was maybe Verne's logic. If I put it on him, maybe I can get a couple extra bucks out of it. But Hansen wasn't going to share. No doubt about that.
Nor should he. I mean, he had to talk about solidifying a career in Japan. Stan Hansen asking him for a cut of the dough. No way. Not on this planet.
He was already a legend in Japan, with or without Verne. He was going to pack the houses in Japan.
As we set the stage here for the summer of 1985, we are going to look at the world champions quickly. You talked about the Road Warriors having won the titles August 25th, 1984. They've been champions for a year. They defeat Crusher and Baron von Raschke. And the AWA World Heavyweight Champion is Rick Martel, of all people, having defeated Jumbo Sharuda over a year ago, May 13th, 1984. So as we walk in, like you said, title changes did not happen every week back in the day. But Rick Martel is champion. Rick Martel, I've said this a million times, one of my favorite five when I'm talking about going and watching wrestling. Just put me some Barry Windham, some Brad Armstrong, some Kurt Hennig. Give me some Rick Martel. I could watch it all day long. But as the world champion, you're not going to pull the trigger on Hulk Hogan, but you're going to pull the trigger on Rick Martel. That's kind of a peculiar decision there.
Well, yes, it is. But, with Verne, he liked the wrestler, it seemed like more than the showman. And I can say this, in my opinion, especially after seeing him defend the title and chase the title, I thought Martel was kind of an underrated world champion. People look at his WWF as the model, and he was a character, blah, blah, blah. But when you saw him in person, he put on some really good matches.
Oh, 100%.
And he even got some good matches out of Boris Zukov. When they wrestled in Canada, they had a cage match. And I'm like, wow, Martel and Zukov had some good matches together. And a big part of that, of course, was Martel.
Now, I haven't done the research on this, so if I'm wrong, somebody out there, please shoot me a DM. I'll correct it on the next episode. But everything I've read online has said Rick Martel, and I'm paraphrasing here, it wasn't this harsh, but essentially he was a failure as the champion as far as drawing goes. He did not have the drawing ability that they needed as the world champion. I'm not going to ever argue that Rick Martel shouldn't have been given a heavyweight title. I'm just curious how you pull the trigger on a guy who's just Rick Martel. I mean, he's great looking babyface. Don't get me wrong. And amazing worker in the ring. But again, French Canadian accent. And yeah, he could speak, but he wasn't going to draw people into the crowd just based on his promo ability. So maybe Verne was hoping that the good looks would bring in the females. I don't really know what the idea was.
Yeah, I have heard the same thing, that it wasn't a profitable venue with Martel as the champ. I just know as a fan, the matches were good, but behind the scenes, yeah, I had heard he wasn't drawing them in. But me personally, when I was at the arena, I never saw the crowd, cut in half because Martel was on top or anything like that. People still showed up. They still lost their mind when he came out. Put on great matches, but that was an era where you had to talk him into the building, and Martel was not known for great promos. The accent didn't help him. I enjoyed him as a champ, but, maybe they weren't making money, which is supposed to be the bottom line.
I've talked with a lot of guys that were from the Northeast, the Philly area, the Baltimore area, and basically their take was the WWF tag team guy? That's how they looked at it. Obviously, Martel had done a couple stints with the belt with Tony Gurria. And again, I'm not taking away anything from Rick. You can give him any belt you want, and I'm not going to argue it. You know what I mean? So, but at the same time, it's just a very interesting choice who do you have to choose from? And he chooses Rick Martel. And I'm happy he did. It's a great piece of history for Martel. A lot of people talk about the model. They talk about the Can-Am connection and the issues with Zenk and Strikeforce winning the tag titles. And even his matches teaming with Tony Gurria. But you don't hear a lot of people go, oh, you mean the AWA World Heavyweight Champion? That's unfortunate.
Yeah, and you know what it reminds me of? These two can be lumped in the same boat or whatever, is that the Red Rooster. You and I both know Terry Taylor could work. We talked about him in the UWF podcast. He was a good worker, good in the ring, good as a heel. But if you only saw him as the Red Rooster, you'd be like, what is the big deal? And those people that saw him in the WWF saw him, with Gurria, they have a certain thought on him or whatever. I grew up with Martel chasing the belt and winning the belt, so I look at him different than just, oh, he was the model or he was Tito's partner. Right. I think that's a big part of it, the region you grew up and when you saw him. Because, let's face it, if somebody saw Ric Flair in 1997, they'd be like, this guy's the greatest of all time, but you see him in 84, it's a different guy. So I think that might have something to do with it.
The context of it all, absolutely. I 100% agree with you. It's like somebody I knew that saw Tommy Rich for the first time in ECW. Meanwhile, there's people over here that grew up in the Cleveland area that saw Tommy Rich when he was the Hulk Hogan of Georgia Championship Wrestling. So everybody looks at everybody differently.
Well, here's one for you that might blow your mind. At the Showboat back in the day when Paul Dangerously came out with the Midnight Express, there were women that were going gaga over him. With the mullet and the long hair, but you look at Dangerously now and some people are like, what? But I saw girls that thought he was hot. When he was 24, he was thin and he had the long hair and he was the preppy. It's a matter of context.
Yes, the yuppie, right? The psycho yuppie. Paul E. Dangerously. Yeah. Very good, sir. I'm going to talk to you about a couple titles here that, I use the term titles loosely. The AWA batted around a light heavyweight title off and on for a few years here. It would go back and forth between a couple of guys, Steve Regal being one of them. I think he's the current champion at this point in time in 85. But in between Regal's run, before and after, unfortunately, another guy was the light heavyweight champion. What do you remember about, and I apologize for anybody out here for my potty mouth, but as I referred to him as piece of shit Buck Zumhoff?
Well, Zumhoff was popular, but he was more popular once he turned the radio on. I think people liked the music he listened to on the way to the ring, more so than his actual wrestling. But, as far as Steve Regal, I liked his work, and something he did that I always thought was cool was the light heavyweight champion was supposed to be 225 pounds or less. So they would always do something that would get a little extra heat on him where Zumhoff would pin him. and the crowd would think, wow, we saw a new champion. And then Regal would get on the mic. This wasn't for the title. I had a big celebratory dinner last night. I gained a couple pounds. I came in weighing 227. This was non-title. It's not a title. And anyway, I just always kind of remember that about Regal. How they played with that little weight limit thing, you know. But, Zumhoff was, it's sad what he's become and, you know, and what a scumbag he is. But he was over, but nobody I would go out of my way to see.
He was a guy who actually feuded with Bobby Heenan. I don't mean like Hogan feuded with Bobby, but actually wrestled with Bobby Heenan there. So that's kind of where Zumhoff was on the roster, really. I mean, and that's the way I always envisioned him. I was never a fan. Before any of this stuff came out, before any of this, you know, transpired with Zumhoff going to prison and everything like that, I was just never a fan. I don't mean as an adult watching tapes. I don't mean as a teenager trading tapes. I mean as a kid watching. I don't get this guy. He looks like the guy that plays pick up basketball down there at the court, you know, at the corner or something. He just looks like some random, in an Elvis jumpsuit, obviously. And the irony of it is, I think Bobby Heenan was the one that told the story. He said that the irony of Zumhoff's character was he hated rock and roll. He loved old time country Western music. So he hated listening to the rock and roll. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think people identified more with his music than his in-ring work. Well, like I said, once he turned the radio on the way to the ring or whatever, then people, because they liked the music that was playing. Yeah, and that was a day before everybody had theme songs coming to the ring.
Right, yeah. I was never a fan. I didn't buy into him. He was one guy I never bought into. And then, you know, I come to learn long before what happened, the most recent altercations before he got sent to prison, he did another stint there at the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, whatever the case was, over something fairly similar. And he goes to prison there for about a year or something, and he gets out and he goes and does jobs for Vince. And I'm like, wow, okay, so we're right back into the wrestling business after the first issues transpired. So unfortunately, he's going to be here. We're going to have to talk about him from time to time, but the less said, the better.
Yeah, I'll agree with that.
All right, Roman, now we're going to get to the fun part of the show, because now we're going to talk. This is going to be all Roman Gomez for the next however long this goes on.
Hey, I've been having fun even before this.
Okay, well, we're going to have a lot more fun now. The listeners are going to they hear me all the time. Now they're going to listen to Roman talk about memories. We're going to talk memories of the AWA, but first we're going to talk memories of Pro Wrestling USA. And before we do that, I want you to explain to everybody what the ideals behind Pro Wrestling USA were.
Well, Pro Wrestling USA was a combination of AWA and NWA, and it was their way of trying to combat Vince McMahon. They were trying to get talent from all over because they knew Vince was sucking up all the people from the territories. So they're like, well, let's join forces and compete against Vince. The problem is, you know, there's only so many guys you can push. You know, why is your guy going to beat my guy, you know, on a card, and, you know, and how come he's getting pushed and not this? You know, it's just, they couldn't agree on things. But the concept was cool. You know, it was an alternative. It was nice when you'd watch a show and like, oh, I get to see Jerry Lawler. I normally don't get to see Jerry Lawler or something like that. But it was very short-lived. And then eventually me and my friends would just kind of rename it Pro Wrestling AWA. Because by the time like February of 85, the TV show was still called Pro Wrestling USA, but it was all AWA guys pretty much.
Right. Anybody who has the opportunity to go check it out, it's amazing. It's really it's a lot of squash matches mostly on the TV, but it's still a dream card because you're taking the best from the AWA, the best from Jim Crockett Promotions, the best from what was left of Georgia at the time, Jerry Jarrett in Memphis. Mm-hmm. All these guys are appearing. So you can see Jerry Lawler, Bob Backlund, Masked Superstar, Butch Reed. I mean, random tag teams were just thrown together. It was heaven, you know, as a kid, you know, and again, I didn't get to see a lot of this until the tape trading era, but I just remember going, wow, what is this? What is happening here? And you're right. It was basically, all right, if Vince wants to go national, we can't do it by ourselves, but let's go in together and we can form Voltron, right? And so, but just like you said, too many cooks in the kitchen, man.
Yes. You and I have talked before on podcasts about how we collected magazines and like, oh, wow, I finally get to see Carlos Colon. You know, I wouldn't have got to see him without Pro Wrestling USA, you know? So little things like that. And there was one that I was kind of surprised that it had Lawler versus Eddie Gilbert. and they treated it like it was just a normal squash match. And I was reading in the magazines what a feud they had, and the two of the top guys in Memphis. Anyway, Pro Wrestling USA got it, and it was a Lawler squash match in 3 minutes. I go, that's kind of weird.
It's weird Eddie would agree to that. I guess Eddie was just had nothing to do that day, just made the stop through. I guess he might have been leaving the Memphis territory by then, so maybe it wouldn't have mattered. I know he leaves abruptly there when Ernesto comes in. We've covered that, on our Memphis 85 story we've been telling. But so you go to Pro Wrestling USA. Why don't you name drop a few things that sticks out in your mind, memories you had, guys that were over, guys that weren't over, guys that you were like, why is this guy? Just anything that sticks out to you specifically from the Pro Wrestling USA era.
Okay. Well, yeah, I went to a taping at the Showboat in December of 84. And one of the things I remember is getting in trouble with my mom because the TV taping had like 25 matches. I went to the matches at 7:30, got home about 2 o'clock in the morning, and she's like, I thought you were at the wrestling matches. Why are you just now getting home? I'm like, Mom, they had extra matches. But anyway, we talked to Steve Kern about that, and he goes, that's something, he's still got the poster of that, and he goes, yeah, I remember, that card went on forever, and I go, yeah, it did. So that night, the Road Warriors wrestled the Fabulous Ones. I thought we might see another title change, The young Mark and me was like, well, maybe the Fabs will do it. Martel fought Garvin. That was a good match. And the debut of the Masked Superstar, that's something I remember too. And then, we got to see Billy Robinson team with Dennis Stamp a couple times. I remember that. Like they had
even like Dennis Stamp got booked. My goodness, very cool.
Yeah, Dennis Stamp, and then Ken Lucas, Ricky Morton's former tag partner in Southwest Championship Wrestling.
That's right.
Ken Lucas was on that. And a young Tom Zink, who you could see potential. You could see some potential in him, and I'm like, this guy's got the look. He's in shape. He might do something someday. And, Zink had a decent career. He had a career a lot of people would have been jealous of. I did get to see Kamala. That was cool.
Yeah, that's badass. So, all right, so you got to scope out the Pro Wrestling USA. They did a tape. Where did they tape that particular episode?
The Showboat.
The Showboat, okay. Which is going to become home to Verne here very shortly, to the AWA, I mean, with the ESPN. But ESPN's going to actually kick off. Their first show is going to be the Tropicana in Jersey. And Jamie Ward shared us a story about that. We'll talk about that when we get there. But right now I want to talk to you, and that we do not have to be relegated to this particular time frame in general or anything like that. But take me through some of your memories of attending AWA events out that way.
It was fun. It was a different era where, for the most part, other than a TV taping, there was only like 5 matches on the card. That was when the curtain jerker would go 20 minutes. They'd have a couple matches. They'd have a 20-minute intermission, couple more matches, and then they would tease, kind of like how Finkel would do at Madison Square Garden. Next month so and so's coming here, and you can go get your tickets now. So a lot of people during the intermission would run and go get their tickets from the box office for the next month's matches. And something I loved about the AWA is that there were times they would come they came every month, but there were times, depending on when they come, you could see them like twice in a 3-week span.
Oh, wow.
So they may come like February 25th, and then they go, we'll be back on March 9th. And you're like, whoa, already? So that was kind of cool to see them so often. And also, the young kid in me that had the all-star trading cards would try to get them signed. There was only one way out of the building, so you would wait at the top of the escalators. The wrestlers would come out, and if security goes, you can't wait up here, then you would just go to the bottom of the escalators and wait, and everybody came out. So I was able to get Jesse Ventura to sign stuff.
Anybody ever snatch your card and scribble it out or anything like that out of curiosity? Or?
No, I didn't know who Marty Funk was then, but thanks for the reminder. I did have Hawk kind of snark at me. I got a picture with Sergeant Slaughter, and Hawk was getting ready to go in the elevator, and he goes, "Can I get in the picture too?" And I'm like, wow. He was just Hawk being Hawk, I guess. But nobody scratched out an autograph back then.
Well, that's still fun times, though, man, to be able to. What were your peak era? What was the time frame that you started attending through the time you finished attending the shows off and on?
I went frequently in 84, 85, I'd say 86. I was there for a lot of the Rockers, Rose, and Summers I was there for. So I was there in 86. Maybe not every month, but when the Rockers, Rose, and Summers, I was definitely there. 87 a little bit, then 88 it kind of started to wane off. I went to a couple of the shows, but wasn't a regular attendee then. But 84 and 85 were great, and the Road Warriors are there, Freebirds, and some of the people we've already mentioned.
Can't say that I blame you dipping out there a lot of people had abandoned the AWA, unfortunately, by the end of the 1980s, and rightfully so, given, the product overall. Now, there was still some fun talent there if you want to nitpick and pull things up. Bad Company certainly rings a bell. But
yes.
I think it goes to show you, we go back to, we didn't know what a 5-star match was, but we knew what a good match was. And so I think it's fun that we went to the Rockers matches with Rose and Summers.
Oh my gosh, single, tag, whatever, it didn't matter. It was amazing, and it kind of sucked that there really wasn't more teams for the Rockers to have good matches with. So, they kept going back to the well of Rose and Summers, and it was the excitement of the baby faces, are they finally going to win the belts, and then when they had the cage and just the blood everywhere and just like, oh my gosh. Yeah, it was great times back then.
All right, let me pitch a couple things at you here. I want to get your take because they're going to be very important as we move into the first TV when we cover that on the next episode. And so what I want to, when I talk to you about right up front, and they weren't calling him, well, Larry Zbyszko was calling them this, but they weren't necessarily calling him this on the TV product. But I referred to him as, and you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, RAMBO Greg Gagne. Tell everybody a little bit about RAMBO Greg Gagne.
Yeah, RAMBO Greg Gagne went to Camp Slaughter. They were trying to give Gagne, I guess, like a little more rugged image. And so they had vignettes of Slaughter training Greg Gagne, chopping wood. He was in his military fatigues. He was running, and, Slaughter was going to make more of a man out of him, and thankfully the military RAMBO Greg Gagne didn't last too long.
No, I guess they were reaching for an idea. Jim Brunzell leaves the AWA. Greg Gagne without a partner to turn back to the High Flyers there. What can we do? He's going to go get toughened up there, go to Slaughter's Cobra Corps, whatever it was. And there's a vignette for those of you who don't know. There's a little video of Greg running this obstacle course or whatever you want to call it here with Sergeant Slaughter barking the orders and getting him into shape, getting him prepared for the future here. And Greg, his choice in gear is very interesting as well. And I'll leave it at that for this week's episode. I don't know that you could wear that in the Army. I think maybe Jamie Farr might have worn something similar to this in MASH perhaps. But
The old AWA Kids Classic videotapes have come into play a couple times. That, and then something we'll talk about the debut episode of AWA on ESPN. I
can't believe they didn't put the Slaughter video into the first episode. That would have been tremendous. If Verne thought that was that cool, they needed to add to explain why Greg is out there wrestling in fatigues, mind you. So it's just
they referenced it. Verne did mention, Greg's been to Camp Slaughter, but
yeah, not that he's not a good wrestler. He just learning some new skills or something like that. I don't remember how Verne does it to cover it up, but it's a thing, guys, and we're going to be talking about it here for the next little bit anyway. In the AWA 1985 RAMBO Greg Gagne, I get a kick out of Larry calling him that as he's walking away from a promo there in the first episode. Gotta get the little jab in there, brother and brother-in-law, and I don't know if Larry was married into the family yet, but it's fun.
I was just going to say, I don't think anybody even then was believing that Greg Gagne was a tough guy because he had the RAMBO. Good worker, but not a tough guy.
Introduce him. He has one of those belly shirts on, like a fatigue belly shirt on, right? So it's like, what do we do? Yeah. I don't really know what you're telling me here, but at the same time, I'm like, take that shirt off. And then he takes the shirt off and he's wrestling in these like army pants or whatever you want to call them. And they look like they're falling off. He has like no body, right? And I'm not trying to critique Greg Gagne's body by any means, but he looks like a guy I hired to come paint my walls or something. I don't know, man. It's just random Greg Gagne is what this gimmick is, I guess.
I think I was bigger than Greg Gagne when I was in 8th grade, so it wasn't physically imposing.
No, Greg, he had I would say what I would call a normal body, earlier in his career, but from the mid 80s onward, he got that. I don't know if he became a vegetarian. You remember when Kowalski, they say he became a vegetarian, dropped like 100 pounds there or whatever. I don't know what the deal was for Greg, but that's very interesting. So we talked about titles a little bit ago. One of the belts I left out was a 1985 belt specifically. I don't know if it's going to continue on. We'll have to follow. But there's a belt lurking around by the name of the America's title. And you can guesstimate who the champion of the America's title is. It is one Sergeant Slaughter. I'm saluting nobody right now. But the Sarge apparently defeated Larry Zbyszko for the belt upon returning to the company earlier here in 1985. So Zbyszko supposedly had won the belt, imagine this, in Mexico of all places in January. Enter Sergeant Slaughter, who wins the gold in, just a few months later. He's going to pick up the America's Championship and defend that America's title against that evil Russia.
And I'm sure it was a packed sellout crowd in Mexico to watch the America's title being defended.
I would have loved to have seen Larry Zbyszko work. Talk about the heel heat. Like Sir Lorenzo Zbyszko, that would have been tremendous. Book that all day long.
Oh, yeah, the stalling and everything, I can tell you, the Mexican crowd, they would have hated it. They would have hated him. They're used to the high flying and the flippity-flop and all that, and Zbyszko stepping between the ropes and calling timeout and stalling. Yeah, they would have hated him.
Oh, sit Mexico aside for a minute. I hated Larry Zbyszko and the stalling here in the States. I can only imagine what another country would think of it. But I've come to grow and appreciate Larry over the years, certainly as an adult. But back as a kid, he did exactly what he set out to do, and that was just pissed me off, right? So I was not a fan of Larry Zbyszko.
There was one episode of Georgia TV that I remember, and it just kind of shows like the brilliance and the psychology and the booking. He kept stepping out of the ring and stalling, and the 10-minute time limit eventually ended up expiring, and a lot of it was because of stalling. And I remember Gordon Soley saying, he can't ride his bike in the Omni when he's wrestling Tommy Rich. He's got to get in the ring because it's a 20-minute time. Anyway, the thought behind it was it made you want to go to the Omni to see him because he'd have to wrestle. He couldn't stall for 10 minutes. And I'm like, that's brilliant in its simplicity.
It really is brilliant in its simplicity. And at the same time, I'm wondering, why are you promoting and acknowledging the fact that this guy screws around and doesn't wrestle? But back in the day, that's all you really needed was just a shtick. And Larry's shtick was to piss the fans off by screwing around to get you to come see him actually wrestle and maybe get his ass beat at the arena.
Yeah. And, with Zbyszko, he's a Hall of Famer, former world champ, feuded with Bruno. But I think part of the reason he's a Hall of Famer, he's the only guy in history to ever hold the America's title and the Western States Heritage title.
Oh, wow. That's some serious credentials right there. You got to put that in. That's
two prestigious championships right there.
Yeah, somebody AI a picture of that and get him to sign it, man. No doubt. Oh my goodness. All right, guys, we're finished setting the stage, but it's time to get into what we came here for. We're going to cover the TV on the next episode, but we're going to set the stage and explain really briefly here how this all came about. And honestly, it's not that elaborate of a story how AWA came to be on ESPN. The entire deal was built around two things: ESPN needing cheap programming and the AWA needing national exposure to continue to compete at the level of Vince McMahon, or somewhere close to it anyway, or, well, maybe not even close, but attempting to compete with Vince. So remember, this was early cable, Roman, so ESPN was still filling the hours. They were still doing that in the early 90s, because I used to watch it. Oh, boy, let me tell you some of the things that were on ESPN. But desperate for content themselves, ESPN could dub sports-related in any facet of the world. So we could see ping pong. We could see bowling. There was a lot of bowling on ESPN, but we could also see professional wrestling. So a content supply agreement was made between the two sides. The AWA basically gave ESPN the show for little to no rights fees. And in exchange, ESPN gave the AWA national exposure and some ad inventory. They could throw their own commercials in there. And that's pretty much how the whole deal comes together.
Yeah, and at that time, ESPN was the premier sports network. There wasn't
it was the only
tons of
network.
Yeah. Sports Channel, I don't think was around back then. A lot of there was no streaming services or whatever, so it was kind of we'll each help each other out type of thing.
Well, it was a TV channel that needed product, and it was a product that needed TV. So it worked out that way here in 1985. And ESPN was still shopping around. We know Dallas World Class will wind up on there before too long as well. But remember, the AWA already had a syndicated program, All-Star Wrestling. But this particular program on ESPN would be called Championship Wrestling. Put a lot of thought into that. So it's going to go on, at least early here, a 90-minute program airing Tuesday evenings is how it's slated as it starts out. The format is simple. Your typical wrestling program filled with wrestling matches, interviews, a solid feature bout, and a brand new talk show segment hosted by Larry Zbyszko, kind of a memory lane style segment as well, going to be factored in from time to time, featuring old school matches that could range anywhere from a couple months, as we'll see on the first episode, to several years old, as we'll see on the second episode. So on paper, solid structure. Wrestling, interviews, talk show, feature match. You even get some old-timey clips. But let's see how this plays out in its delivery.
Yeah, and, whereas the syndicated show was, for the most part, squash matches, like you said, you would get a main event, and a lot of these ones were main events that people would actually pay to see. Like a Slaughter and Zukov would headline other arenas, not just for this TV. So they did put on some good main event matches, a little bit longer matches, 15, 20 minutes. So that was kind of exciting back then.
Well, before we wrap up, I just want to mention, for the longest time, it's believed that the first AWA in Roman, I know you were even confused based on, some of the way things were labeled, and even the way the WWE, the old 24/7 labeled this particular episode. There's a lot of people that had the dates incorrect here, and it took a lot of digging. And I tell this story, and you really don't understand how long it took me. I sat on my couch one night, and it probably took me 4 hours to go through every different fan bulletin I had from this time period, and I get to the final folder and the final file, and I find the match listings thanks to, I think it was, no, it wasn't Observer, because Dave turned me on to the date. Dave Meltzer, I'll give him credit. He had in an old 85 Observer that the AWA would debut on ESPN August 27th. Now, the video floating around forever, the earliest one that everybody thought to be was September 3rd. And that date is correct. That's a September 3rd episode. But once I realized in the Observer that Dave said that there was a show on August 27th, now I needed to figure out what was on that show, where the hell is that show. And like I said, I went through every fan bulletin I possibly could find. And in the very last one, there it was, the results. Now I knew what I was looking for. And I come to you, Roman, and I'm like, hey, I found half the show. And you're like, what were the matches? And you're like, well, I have the other half. Oh, you wind up having the entire show, actually. But it's labeled because you have an old WWE 24/7 subscription that they used to offer. It's labeled June 27th incorrectly, I might add. And I can verify that for many different reasons. Some of these guys weren't even in this territory. They were in Japan on June 27th. But this is actually August 27th, this episode, and we have it in pristine quality thanks to Roman. So I want to thank you for that, Roman.
No, and I want to thank you, and I can vouch to everybody out there, Ray's diligence, when he would hit me up and like, I'm still looking for this, or I'm trying to find this. He put in his time to come up with results and to help me for future shows, because a lot of the AWA stuff I have is compilations. So I'm like, well, is it from this date or what am I missing? Ray's done his homework on this. So I want to thank you for that. It's made things a little bit easier for me as well.
Absolutely. A lot of digging I've done. I think I'm pretty confident I have every episode going through the end of 1985. There's a couple dates missing, but from everything I can find, they were replays, repeats. And that's just the world of the AWA. I somehow believe that. So, but I'm going to continue to dig.
Oh, definitely.
I'll look into that as we continue on. But so just to give everybody a little taste of what's coming here, we're going to see the return from suspension, a.k.a. Montreal. Gorgeous Jimmy Garvin's going to be back to kick off the first episode of TV. RAMBO Greg Gagne is going to be here. We're going to hear from Larry Zbyszko. In this corner is his talk show. He's going to be interviewing the AWA World Champion Rick Martel.
Rick Martel, the World Heavyweight Champion, on Larry Zbyszko's show, and Zbyszko's not a big fan of Martel.
No, what could go wrong?
They go back a ways, but yeah, what can go wrong?
Yeah, we're going to see a lot of cool stuff. So in this corner of the talk show, we're going to go back to the St. Paul Civic Center just over a month before this airing, July the 14th, St. Paul. It's going to be the Road Warriors taking on the Long Riders. And you want to talk about a slobber knocker, this may be where the term came from. That's a hell of a brawl and a fight. Looking forward to talking about that. The Fabulous Freebirds are here. Hayes, Gordy, and Roberts in full effect. 6-man tag team action against Kurt Hennig, Tom Zink, and piece of shit Buck Zumhoff.
We knew we couldn't get away from him.
Get used to it, folks. That's just his name in my world anyway. But so the Freebirds are on the show. The Road Warriors, we're going to hear from Rick Martel. Jimmy Garvin's back. We're loading the first show, not by mistake. And the feature match, we're going to see the America's champion Sergeant Slaughter take on the newest Russian to arrive here in the AWA, and that is Boris Zukov.
Sarge, it's only appropriate that the America's champion would be Sergeant Slaughter, and he'd be defending the title this week. Against
a Russian, no less, right? So that's right. So
yeah, imagine that.
I don't know how they made that happen. It's magic. So we're going to talk all about that entire episode and a whole lot more on the next episode here when Roman Gomez returns. Roman, it's been a blast. It's like we never dismantled, really. I mean, it's just like riding a bike.
Oh, it's always great. It's been a while due to just life and things going on, but it's always a good time recording with you.
Well, all we had to do was find a day and a time to get back together, and here we are, guys. It's the AWA on ESPN, and it all kicks off in the next episode of Regional Rasslin in the AWA Project when Roman Gomez returns. Roman, I want to thank you so much for doing this with me, man, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
Thank you. Can't wait to tackle it.